So thank you for everyone coming out tonight. I know it can be quite a trek during the evening hours in Los Angeles, so appreciate you coming out. This is our second in the series of art talks in conjunction with our Rogue Wave 2013 exhibition. My name is Chris Pate, and I'm the organizing curator of the exhibition, working alongside the owner-director of the gallery, Peter Goulds, and Kimberly Davis, Elizabeth East, and Lisa Jan. So all of us put this show together, and I'm very pleased and happy to welcome three of our artists tonight. We'll be hearing from Peter Holzhauer, whose photographs are right here. We'll start with him. Then we'll move on to Assad Falwell and Allison O'Daniel. So looking forward to hearing from all of them. And the format will basically be each of the artists getting a chance to speak a bit about their work, give you an idea of their approach and ideas behind their practice, followed by a Q&A. And I would just request that for the question and answer, if we could actually pass the mic around, because we are recording the conversation here and it's good for the archive. So just be patient and we'll pass the mic around and get everyone's questions recorded for posterity. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Peter Holzhauer to introduce his work to you.
Thanks, Chris. Hello, everybody. Thanks for coming. I'm Peter Holzhauer. These are my pictures. I'm always more comfortable, I think, being out in the world making pictures than talking about them or explaining what they are about. But I guess maybe it makes sense to start by saying that I use a film camera. The camera looks, it's wooden, it's on a tripod, looks sort of very old-fashioned. I've had it since 1998, I guess. And this isn't a series, I call it maybe a suite of pictures that I sort of pulled together as an edit from the past couple years. Maybe I'd just talk about a couple of them specifically, like maybe this picture here. That's a wall of a gas station that they had torn down near the intersection of Normandy and Adams. And I think I first stopped and tried to make a picture of the taco truck near there, and that didn't work out. And then I started talking to the guys who were working there and realized the light wasn't right and made arrangements to come back the next day. What else can I say? This picture down here, I guess, is a piece of plastic covering the flat files in my studio. And the portrait, that's my sister on her cell phone. I guess, I don't know what else to say, except that I think it's a really interesting challenge to try to just make really clear, straightforward photographs and not change them too much or manipulate them too much. I mean, these are all printed on traditional black and white paper in the dark room, and it's sort of an antiquated process now. And with the internet and cell phone pictures, it seems sort of like an absurd way to be making art, and I think that's almost like makes me more into it. It seems like almost a disdained sort of practice. But yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions that you guys are attempting.
I have a few quick questions before we start. Can you elaborate a little bit more about specifically what the printing process is and why it's antiquated?
Yeah, it's most of these are made with the analog process. So I'm using a negative. I'm developing the negative in the dark room, in the dark with my hands in chemistry, and it's a little piece of plastic film, and And then when I make the prints this size, I put the negative in an enlarger. It's a sort of classic disappearing way of printing technology.
So there is a format, like a size limitation that's inherent in that approach. To an extent.
You mean in terms of printing very large?
Yeah, you said something when we visited about, in a certain way, taking a stand against the large format photography that's come to sort of dominate the discourse in recent years.
Yeah, I've certainly experimented with making larger prints, and it is harder and more expensive, but I think that maybe that moment is sort of past where photographs need to be really large to hold the wall next to painting or sculpture. So, but that's not to say that you can't make very large-scale prints using this process. Jeff Wall makes beautiful analog black and white prints, or other people do from his negatives. So it's not necessarily a size limitation, but this just, yeah, I hope that it doesn't seem too modest or precious. I hope that, it's sort of a good size.
It draws me in. Does anyone have questions for Peter? We'll pass the mic.
What are you looking for when you go out to take pictures?
I don't know. Usually when I think I do know, they're not that interesting. I move past them. I don't choose those negatives. That the picture of the facade in Naples, Italy, I think I was fascinated by just checking out that city. Other photographers had made pictures I really respected there. I think for that particular image, I got up at dawn really excited to go to this particular spot that I had scoped out, that I was sure was going to be a good picture, and made a bunch of negatives there, and then sort of on my way back to where I was staying, made this kind of on the way, and this one was clearly better than the other one. So I don't have something,
right.
I can't say that there's something that specific. I guess maybe I would just say it's satisfying myself on trying to make a relevant picture.
But you're kind of on the way to, that's a wonderful photo.
Thank you.
It just says so much, and yet it's still a mystery. But presumably, this one over here, did you say you were trying to take a picture of something else and then that didn't really work? So it's the same sort of story. You're kind of going after something, but you find something else, is it?
Yeah, and it's hard to articulate. I wouldn't want to go out and say that's my, stance or something, but that seems to be how it plays out usually. Yeah.
What about your sister on the cell phone, for example?
We get that.
What about your sister on the cell phone, for example? I think that you're playing with the idea of like analog versus digital there, or like were you just taking pictures of your sister and then she pulled out her cell phone and then you thought like, oh, I'll take this with my wooden camera. And did you make your wooden camera?
I'll start with the last question first. I did not make my wooden camera. I wish I could.
Wait, where does a wooden camera come from, and what year is it made in then?
I think it comes from Newfane, Vermont, and there's a guy that when it breaks every couple of years I send it to who doesn't do email. So it's interesting communicating with him.
How long does it take to set up the camera?
3 or 4 minutes, but I've been doing it for a while.
Okay, now your sister on the cell phone, what sort of play are you playing here with this analog and digital world?
Yeah. It partly is just taking a picture of my sister. I think she was visiting me from out of town. She's my younger sister. I don't see her that often. And I think I just saw her doing that and said, can you do that again while I set up the camera and hold that? And I don't know, I think while I was in school, I think maybe Michael Fried came and talked about his idea of absorption and photography and, people in painting, people like doing something, being absorbed in an activity. And I think I'd been sort of unconsciously trying to see if I could make a picture of someone doing something for a while. But I was also probably just attracted to the pattern in her shirt. And the light, I think, I teach photography, and I always tell students that window light is way better than, you know, a $4,000 strobe setup. It's just, you can't beat window light, the way it describes surfaces and people.
You said it's a wooden camera. Is it a view camera?
Yeah, you can call it a view camera.
So you're looking at the image upside down when you compose it?
Yeah, upside down and backwards on a ground glass.
Do you want to talk about that, why you choose that over, just say, a 35 millimeter or a Hasselblad or something, traditional film cameras?
Yeah, it produces a bigger negative, so the tonal range is smoother, and I think it forces me to sort of go slower and think about each picture more than I would using a digital camera or even a handheld camera. There's cost and labor involved to sort of see each picture through. But again, it also is sort of feels maybe like a ridiculous way to go about picturing the world in 2013, and it's like an interesting challenge. You know, I have friends who are photographic artists that say, you know, well, hasn't everything been photographed? And maybe it has, but I'm not sure it has. Like, I think.
Are you Luddite?
What's define Luddite?
Someone who's against technology.
No.
Okay.
I thought I knew what it meant, but I wasn't sure. No, I think actually two of these pictures, for technical reasons, were printed using, you know, a machine called a light jet, which is, you know, very state-of-the-art technology. And, you know, like the picture of my sister, I think I only had color film at that time, so I couldn't print it without scanning the negative and having it go through a machine. And I think artists should use whatever tools they have to make the work the way it should be, but it's, so no, long answer, I don't think I'm a Luddite.
Anyone else?
Hi. What is the size of your negative? You didn't say.
It's 4 by 5 inches, so maybe a little bit smaller than like a CD jewel case.
It's really big. And do you crop, do you change the cropping that a lot, you know, from what you shot? Just
No, almost never.
Wow. Oh, you really get it. So it's a larger negative helps you make it more look like a painting, or, you know, you get your scene in nicely on a large negative.
Yeah,
Very
yeah.
good. Very good. That was about it. I just wondered what size. Thank you.
Anyone else? Of course.
Nobody else. Is that lit, the one with your sister? I mean, did you light it specifically, or is it natural lighting?
There's a window just to her right. She's sitting at a table, so, you know, I lit it in that I told her where to sit, but
Right.
no, I don't use, I'm sort of intimidated by artificial lights usually. So no, it's window light, like I was
It's
saying.
fantastic. I mean,
Yeah, that window light it's spectacular as a way to describe things.
And knowing how to use it, which you clearly do.
Yeah, I'm very familiar with the way the camera works and the way it renders light. So it's almost something I don't have to think about now, which is, I think, good. I can just sort of make the picture, not have to be too sidetracked by thinking about the technical part of it.
Fantastic.
Terrific. Anyone else? Oh, excellent.
I'm not sure exactly what is it that I'm thinking about, but what is it that is more interesting to you, the process of the photograph or documenting the place? Or why is it that you're interested in photography and not any other mediums?
It's a hard question. It's I've just been doing it so long I don't really know how to do anything else. The process I wouldn't say it interests me in that it's certainly not, it's not fun, it hasn't been fun for a long time. It's just sort of what I know I'm supposed to be doing. So the work, it's kind of drudgery. So no, I don't think I'm interested in the process. I think I'm interested in satisfying myself and finding a picture that I feel is successful. That it, you know, I can then move on, like try to make the next one.
Thank you.
It seems like if that was the case, you would just be using, you would have transferred over to digital photography. I mean, I also work with kind of an arcane medium and appreciate what you're doing here a lot. But if it was just the image, there must be something, you know, I developed this way also, and there is a love of that process for a lot of people. So, I mean, the image is one thing, but you are doing this really interesting thing today.
Yeah, it's hard to articulate, I guess. But maybe it goes back to now that it's sort of disappearing, it seems, you know, if I'm not going to do it, who else? You know, no one else is going to take a picture of that wall at Normandy and Adams with a real camera, and sort of. I'm fascinated by photography's relationship to history, I guess. And maybe this sort of speaks to your question too. But you know, how the idea of being able to put something away in a box and look at it in 150 years. I think that's really fascinating to me, and I don't think that. I'm not sure that the pictures on our like iClouds are going to be viewable in 150 years. They probably will be, but I think it's something different than having a physical object that you can pick up and hold.
Great work.
Thanks, man.
Cool. Well, I don't know, do you have anything else to say about the work, or does anyone else want to speak up? Otherwise, we can move to the central gallery and take a look at Assad Falwell's work. Thank you, Peter. Without further ado, Assad Falwell.
Thank you. Okay, so I guess in explaining this work, I'll go back to kind of what the original motivation and kind of starting point, because all the work I've been doing for the last couple of years kind of deals with the same issue. So pretty much this work started when I was an undergrad and I was doing an art major and a Middle East Studies major. And for one of my classes, we watched the Battle of Algiers. So I kind of saw it and then kind of forgot about it, and then I watched it again a few years later. And over, time, I ended up kind of wanting to make work about some of the issues that are brought up in that movie. Specifically, violence and the moral justification for violence, or is it ever justified? And then also kind of the gender issues that are brought up. So there's a particular scene in the movie where the Algerians have been carrying out attacks against the French in the French quarter, and the French have retaliated in the Algerian quarter, and the French have closed the Algerian quarter off, and everybody coming in and out kind of has to go through a full body search. But women can pass through more easily because they can't be searched as thoroughly, and particularly women who look European pass through really easily. So over time, women started to become kind of major combatants in that particular battle. So these women who are depicted in these paintings are women who took part in the battle. They're not the actresses in the movie, but images of the actual women. So in some cases, there's like a relation between two of them, like this one is the aunt of this one, and she recruited her to kind of join the FLN, which was the resistance movement, and then she recruited her to join, and also there's a relation in terms of when they were captured, she gave up the location of this woman, and this is the same woman, but it's her before trial or during trial, and then after her release at a like ceremonial event. And then this woman is the same as this one, but she actually she went insane and ended up being institutionalized. So pretty much the story with all of them is more or less the same. They were all captured and tortured and put on trial in France. They were all convicted of murder. They were all sentenced to death, and then they were all pardoned by Charles de Gaulle at the end of the war. So I think what interested me was the way that it relates to kind of current issues, which is really, not that different a situation than what was going on back then. And then also in terms of, the gender issue, I think in a way these women, they were all kind of young feminists, all college students, and I think all believed that they were staking their claim for kind of women's equality after the war, in the same way that a lot of Algerians fought in the French military, I think thinking that they were kind of going to be granted their independence as a result. So also one thing that was interesting to me was Algerian women have been a kind of, they've been depicted multiple times through art history with like Delacroix and Picasso, who all did fairly lengthy series on Algerian women, but it was like kind of anonymous, almost like faceless women in harems. So I wanted to do kind of an updated version of those series and have a series that was about Algerian women, but in a very specific way, and kind of in a way that wasn't so, I think in those images, they're generally just kind of sexualized and kind of exoticized, so I wanted to kind of try to do something that was different from that. I guess in terms of the visuals, I think, you can kind of see most everything. Like the background stuff is, like each one of these has like either 2 or 3 layers of collage. So there's cut paper, which is then painted over, and then there's like a pattern painted on top of that paper. I guess that's it. I think visually it's definitely obsessive. I don't think I'm real good with subtlety. I think it's, it's definitely kind of trying to make the most of every inch available. Yeah, I guess that's about it.
Excellent. I'm sure there's some questions for Assad. Or maybe you summed it all up so eloquently that, here we go.
About the patterns that you're using, are you taking them from different cultures or definitely from Algerian culture? And then is there also the element of the fanciful in there, like something from you thrown in?
I try not to copy. So I try to kind of come up with everything on my own. They're mostly really, really simple. It's like simple elements, simple forms, just kind of, in a kind of in a very dense, repetitive kind of way. So in terms of like references, I think there definitely are references to religious artworks of different types. I think there's definitely like, halo references or references to like Christian icons, references to Islamic art. So that is definitely something that I try to do. I want them to look like shrines or icons.
Could you discuss, you've used straight pins within a number of the works. Could you discuss your use of materials with that?
Yeah, definitely. That was something I started doing more recently, and it was, I always felt like they looked like they could have been sewn, the paintings. So I wanted to bring in that in a way. And then also the idea that sewing is something that is associated with women, but is also something that could be very violent. You know, a needle or a pin could be used as a weapon as well. So I thought about, you know, actually sewing on the paintings. I thought about using needles, and then what I kind of ended up settling on was pins, because it is something that's used in the process, but they were also about the right size where it would relate to other kind of marks and elements I was using already. So yeah, there's like pin heads sticking out like here, and then like over here, and then they have like small repetitive patterns painted on the pin heads.
I'm kind of interested in such a colorful piece. The women are all black and white grayscale,
Right.
which is they're depicted in the film, or probably the images that you use. Just wondering if you
Exactly.
could talk about your choice in that.
Sure, yeah. I guess one of the drawbacks is that there's not a lot of pictures of them. So like in some cases, I only have like one image of the person, or maybe 2 or 3, but they're all black and white. So I think in one sense, keeping them black and white makes a reference to the time period that they were taken in. So it definitely kind of places it in history. And then, you know, usually they're really low quality images, like super blurry, usually like newspaper quality printing. So to a certain extent, I have to kind of fill in some of the gaps as well. Like I can't see a lot of detail in a lot of them. Some of them are extremely blurred. So yeah, I mean, I think keeping them black and white definitely puts it in a certain time period. And then also, I feel like it almost makes them look less human and more like a stone, like a relic of something. So again, like something that existed in the past that doesn't exist anymore.
The background is, I mean, I see a flag. Is that intentional? And can you talk a little bit about those, I guess, like the prisms of light down there?
It wasn't intended to be a flag. I actually was like thinking of them in terms of like a wall. So like this being like one wall and this being like another wall like farther back. In terms of these, you know, that's like, I kind of feel like I have an explanation for everything, but that's like the one thing I just can't. I can't like figure out why I do that or like where it came from. It was just like something I did, and then I kind of liked it. And they kind of just serve as like vessels to hold like these flowers and these other things that come out of them. But I guess in a way, just formally, I like how graphic they are compared to everything else. And I think it provides like some breathing space or contrast with other elements in the work.
It's a nice piece, and
Thank you.
that's one of my favorite movies as well.
Oh, thanks. Great. Thank you.
Anyone else? Here we go.
It's spectacular.
Thank you.
Your whole style is wonderful, and
Thank you so
talk
much.
about icons and iconic, and I love the colors and all that sort of thing. And presumably it takes an immense amount of focus and work to
Yeah.
put it all together.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, something like this takes about probably 4+ months just working on one thing. I generally don't work on more than one thing at a time. So
Right.
it's, I think what Peter was saying about sometimes the process is not always fun, for sure. Sometimes it's, you know, super tedious, but I think working towards the result is kind of like what, you know, keeps me going. But yeah, it's definitely very kind of focused on one thing. I mean, in a given day, I'll probably complete, you know, an area about like that big. So it's definitely like the bigger ones are a daunting task for sure.
So how planned is it? Or are things changing as you go along?
The big things are planned. So like the placement of the figures is planned. Most of the other stuff, the placement of it, I kind of do as I go. So one thing I guess that's good about working so slowly is that I have a lot of time to make decisions as I'm going through the process. So, you know, I'll kind of draw out where the figures are going to be. So I kind of know that, and then from there I'll kind of work off of that and like figure out, okay, well, I want the wall to be about this high, or, you know, and then like this kind of stuff is just more when I'm doing it, I just kind of decide where to put it, and yeah, that's much less planned.
And I was wondering how you got to this point. I mean, what was your early work like?
A lot looser and a lot less obsessive. And also, like, I had, I mean, I'd never painted the figure before, so I had kind of an intense, I would say, fear of painting the figure. So, I mean, all the way through school, I never did it once. So it was like, there was no figures in them really until like the last couple of years, year and a half maybe. They were more just with the pattern, and there was like some of the little photographs that are in it were in there. I used more photographs in the past, but yeah, I mean, the figure's definitely a new thing. But yeah, my older work was, I would say, much rougher and much looser.
So why did it develop in this direction? Just because you wanted to make more of a statement?
I feel like it made more sense with what subject matter I was talking about, and I felt like some of maybe the older aesthetics was like a leftover of what I was doing before, which was really more just abstraction and painting. And then so once I kind of introduced the subject matter to it, I felt like the visuals changed to fit the story.
That's great, thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
You mentioned that these women were pardoned.
Yes.
So, assuming that there is a point of celebration in this scene, but I don't really see that, even though I see the background as a curtain going away and there is something coming about. I still can't help seeing the woman covering the eye.
Right.
With
yeah.
another woman, I mean, in
Right.
this. And then even that one has got something from the eyes, and the
Right.
other ones, something about the eyes are not
Yeah, I mean, I guess I definitely
present.
don't see them as celebratory. They were all pardoned, but they were still imprisoned for a significant number of length of time. They were all tortured really brutally, and in most cases, they never really recovered enough to lead a normal life. Like I said, like this one ended up being institutionalized, and this woman here actually ended up moving. She came back to Algeria for a time and then ended up moving back to France because she actually found that she had an easier time in France. It's kind of ultimately ironic, but I think in every case, they didn't really lead a normal life afterwards. It was definitely a struggle. Those that chose to kind of go on in politics and take up kind of the women's issues kind of fought a losing battle. And those who didn't, like her, just pretty much ended up leading kind of a solitary and pretty depressing existence.
Any other questions for Assad? Hold on.
I'm sorry, I didn't see the film. You said you did a film before this?
It's based on a movie, yeah.
Based on a film.
The Battle of Algiers.
So you did that?
No.
Oh, somebody else did it?
Yeah.
Okay. Did it have any Wahida? You remember the Wahida al-Jazairiyya? She was a really big fighter who was actually tortured and killed.
I haven't used her image.
I
no.
remember growing up with talking about these stories and millions of people that died fighting for freedom. Is like, what a genocide.
It was a brutal, yeah.
So, I mean, yeah, I can definitely understand why they have falling eyes.
Right, yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So,
I mean, there's like, in the research I've done, it's like a lot of times I find names, but I can't find an image to go along with the name.
Yeah, Wahida was really, really famous.
Okay.
She was a huge fighter. And I came out of something like that. My grandma fought the Germans, actually.
Okay.
Yeah, so, I mean, that's what I wanted to say.
Oh, thank you.
Well, thank you, Assad.
Thank you.
Wonderful job. Thank you, everyone. Well, we'll get started. I just wanted to introduce Allison O'Daniel. This is her room, and all the work in the room that you see on the walls, and the video before you, which I guess we have the sound turned off, just in accordance with this.
You'll hear a little bit of it, and it's low, but you'll hear some sound in a little bit. It's right now it's just the sound of ambient rain hitting the top of this truck. So it's,
which is described down here.
Part, yeah, but there are captions, so you can.
The sound element is a very important part of Allison's work, and I'm sure she'll describe that to you.
There is quite a bit more room in here, so if you guys could maybe pull in, and we'll just get very intimate. So I am in the middle of working on a pretty large project called the Tuba Thieves, and basically, over the last few years in Los Angeles, in the entire Los Angeles area, there have been all of these thefts of tubas from high schools and middle schools. And I started hearing this news story on the radio, and every time I would hear it, I would turn the volume up, and I was just really quite mesmerized by the fact that this was happening. There's pretty much one reporter who's kind of been on this story, and I've talked to him about it, and there's a lot of speculation as to why these tubas are being stolen, but primarily they bring in a lot of money on the black market. And I had, around the time that I started hearing this news story, I had just finished my first feature film, which is called Night Sky. And the film, I made the film, half of my cast and crew were deaf and hard of hearing, and I am also hard of hearing. I wear hearing aids in both ears and I lip read. And I had just kind of finished this 3-year odyssey with all of these really amazing people whose experience of listening and of sound spanned this really wide expanse of a completely sort of different language of taking in information and processing it. And it was really relieving to me to start engaging with all these people who are part of deaf culture and also aren't, as I was raised in hearing culture. But anyway, I was around all these people who were really, really thinking about sound, either by necessity because they were forced to all the time, or just because, I don't know, they were really interested in sound, such as a lot of musicians. So I started hearing these stories about the tuba thieves, and I was really moved by it, and so I knew that I was going to make a film called The Tuba Thieves, and I knew that there weren't going to be any tubas in the film. I was just going to let them be stolen, and I wasn't going to try and wrap that up. Like, I was really going to grapple with this loss of sound, or this theft of sound. And so what I decided was that I was going to make a film, and I was going to start with music. I was going to start with listening. So I commissioned 3 composers to make me musical scores, and I gave each of them a list of things that I wanted them to consider. And so basically, I made them a score for their score. So I asked them to think about things, and then they made me music based on these lists that I gave them. And then I got the music, and I just started listening to this music nonstop, and I started responding to it in materials and in shape and in color, and so wood and concrete and fabric and all of these different things. And also I was writing a screenplay based on these things I was hearing. So I would let myself kind of process this music. I drove and drove and drove. I actually did a cross-country tour of my last film and drove across the country listening to these scores. And these scenes would sort of play out in my mind, and the ones that I kept sort of seeing, I ended up writing a screenplay. So I have this screenplay called The Tuba Thieves, and this is the first scene, this is scene 29, but it's the first one that I've shot. So I'm basically going to shoot this film completely out of order, and in the process, I'm going to show scenes of the film as installations, and then eventually stitch it together into a feature-length film. And also along the way, I'm going to keep making these objects based on this music. So specifically, this is a scene that's based on a score by an artist whose name is Christine Sun Kim. She's based in New York City, and she is completely deaf. And so I gave her this list of things that I wanted her to consider. And the list that I asked her to think about was, I'm probably going to forget a few things, but I asked her to think about levitation, I gave her a picture of Louisa Calder's dressing table, which has all this jewelry by Alexander Calder. And I asked her to think about ice skating rinks and roller skating rinks. And I forget some of the other things. One of the things that I gave her was this quote from the introduction of Alexander Tarkovsky's book, Sculpting in Time, where it's a book basically about his process of filmmaking, but in the introduction there's this one quote from a physicist who writes to him and tells him his experience of watching The Mirror. And I copied and pasted this from I think it was like Google Books or something, and I copied it from a PDF, and then when I went to paste it into a Word document, the quote broke apart in this really beautiful way that I saw as like concrete poetry, and it was almost like the essence of the quote became more profound when it did this really sort of natural spreading apart. And so when all was sort of said and done in this scene, we shot it, and I sent it to Christine. I thought that I was going to need her to do a separate vocal track. So this is her voice. She made this entire score through a visual process where she would go and make field recordings, and she would take really extensive notes about like the temperature, the time of day, the people that she could see, and then she would edit it in these 30-second sections because she could see 30 seconds on the timeline, so she edited it completely visually. And then when I was asking her to attempt to re-record her audio, just her vocal track, she hadn't separated the vocal track. It was just all mixed in. So we were trying to figure out how we were going to do this, and she didn't know what she sounded like. So I started describing to her what she sounded like, and then I finished the film and I sent it to her, and the part with her voice, she had no idea what was going on. She said everything else she could imagine the sound. She could imagine the sound of rain hitting a truck, but she didn't know what the plant shaking was. So even though it was actually her voice, she didn't know what it was. So I ended up adding in these captions that describe what the audio is, but also include these sort of transcriptions of our email correspondence, and then also this quote of the Tarkovsky thing. So the score that I gave her is part of the captions. So I'm really interested in sort of how captions function, but then also how captions can kind of expand. I guess I'm sort of interested in that in terms of all aspects of sound and material and color. Okay. That's a lot of information. I can clarify stuff if you need me to.
Does someone need clarification?
Yeah.
I'm just wondering if you could talk about your sculptures a little as well.
Yeah, so the process is the same. I was listening to this music, and I would, to me, it's a very fluid process. Like I listen to this music and I hear, I don't know, I guess I hear these like images. I'm not a synesthete. I don't have synesthesia, which is the experience of when you taste color, or you smell a sound, where your senses kind of flip between the senses. I don't have that condition, but because I have grown up without having access to a lot of sound, and I'm constantly sort of tapping into what is this like potential of my imagination, like I can either be really frustrated, or these moments when I recognize that I don't hear something can also be this sort of like doorway for me to just, I don't know, move into this space of not knowing and then fill in these gaps. And so this sort of play of imagination can happen through material and through color and through shape. And so this piece, for example, the title of this piece is "The Plants Are Protected," and it's also the same title of this scene. So like in a film, when you get the liner notes and each chapter has a title, the chapter title of this scene is called "The Plants Are Protected." And I guess I think of my process as this like very collaborative process. Like I'm collaborating with stories and history and people and material, and I just try and really let it. It sounds very romantic, and maybe it is, but I just try and let it really speak its its thing, and then I help it become its thing or something, or maybe it helps me, I don't know.
Questions? Oh, good.
What inspired you when you were a little girl, and when did you decide to be an artist?
Well, I mean, I am really thankful to my parents because when they just didn't really skip a beat. Like as soon as my parents didn't understand what was going on with me until I was about 3, and I would lose my balance and fall downstairs. And then they kind of realized maybe there was like an inner ear problem. And then just like the whole process of me getting hearing aids, this happened when I was 3. It was so fluid, and my parents were just like, kind of had this approach like, you're a superhero and you should do show and tell. Like it never occurred to me until much later that I should be even slightly self-conscious or maybe embarrassed about it or something. So I think I've just kind of I was introduced to a sense of wonder about my hearing, which is amazing. I mean, I didn't do that. My parents did that, which is cool. And then I was a figure skater. So it was like I had like a performative impulse that included my body, and so that relationship of my hearing and movement and how my body processes information and all this stuff, I guess it was kind of like a fluid process.
Ben.
I was also following this tuba theft story a little bit. I played a trombone in high school and marching band, and so I sat with a low brass, and I marched with baritones and tubas. And I guess I was wondering, from a hearing impaired viewpoint, if the low frequency of the tuba, that sound that you can feel more than other sounds, impact your decision to make art about this, or if that has something to do with your thought process.
I mean, it is amazing that it's the low sound, because with my previous film, Night Sky, I mean, my main goal with that film was how to figure out how to move sound into the body to be felt rather than heard. And the fact that these tubas are being stolen, which are they're cumbersome big instruments. I mean, I talked to a bunch of these band directors who've had tubas stolen, and the stories are amazing. Like this one woman was telling me that she imagines that the tubas are, that when they steal them, they leave the cases, which is amazing. You know, they leave these like sculptures basically. So there are these like empty cases left in these music rooms, and they're prying open the doors. And so she thinks that they're basically putting the tubas in black garbage bags and then throwing them over the fence, that there's probably 2 people. So that's the first scene of the tuba thieves, actually. There is going to be a tuba heist scene, and then we leave the tubas behind. But it's just amazing to me that just the object is so big and sculptural, and then also that the sound is this thing that, I mean, you feel, and it can make you nauseous. I have worked a lot with subwoofers and these, you know, things that you have to process sound through other parts of the body.
Right, thanks.
It's a nice little coincidence, I think.
Ben, you will be performing later tonight with your trombone, right? Oh, here we go.
Well, the fact that you can't hear, you obviously stress on different other sensibility that you have. Like, for example, these sculptures are very balanced. But they're very balanced. Well, I mean, you're dealing with gravity. It's like almost like a plant. So I don't know where that came from. And they're sort of very sensitive also. I mean, it's not structural where you push something up from the earth and you support something. It's just sort of balanced. You can hang from the top. You could do other things with it. I mean, but the question is, not being able to hear, what are some of the other things, how you interpret, how the struggle to understand sounds, how does that, is that an extra sensibility that you push towards that you don't, that maybe a person wouldn't, you mentioned balance, you mentioned learning how to dance. I mean, I'm sure that's as much as of a struggle as.
I mean, it might just be something that I haven't actually thought through, and maybe it's just a tendency that I have. Wait, did I hear you right? I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure. I'm not sure that I heard the question or understand it completely, but that, are you saying that it seems like there's a lot of information about balance that's going on in the work? Yeah.
Then let's say, what I'm trying to get is it's like not being able to hear, instead of just trying to interpret the sound, but the other effects on your body, like you can't, the fact that you cannot hear. There seems to be a stress for balance also. Like this piece, I mean, you know that triangle is not going to fall off the box because you have these other things that are balancing it.
Yeah, I admit that I'm not thinking about balance specifically, but I am thinking about harmony, which is definitely related. I mean, I guess it's no... I'm not conscientiously thinking about balance, but I like that interpretation of it. Like it's when I hear you say that, I'm not surprised by it. I don't feel like, no, that's not right. It's just that I haven't kind of had a conversation with myself about balance, I guess.
Okay. You're wondering if that's a greenhouse? It's the back of a U-Haul, isn't it?
It's a 26-foot truck. It was a Penske truck.
Where did you?
Advocate of Penske.
What are those boxes? They're not showing now, but the boxes.
You want to know what's inside of them?
Yeah.
I imagine that it's moving, like moving stuff. So basically, in the film, the Tuba Thieves has become a film that's about three main characters. And in Night Sky, in my previous film, there was one scene, or there were multiple scenes of a dance marathon, and half of the characters in the dance marathon were deaf and half of them were hearing, and that was just kind of like a side detail. But the main actor of the Tuba Thieves she had a small part in Night Sky, and I found out after the fact she's deaf. I found out after the fact that she's a drummer, and I was really intrigued by this. So as these Tuba Thieves stories were happening, I was really moved by this. And so basically this screenplay is a film about this woman, Nike, who is a deaf drummer, and her relationship with her father, who's hearing, and her boyfriend, who is hearing, and her boyfriend happens to drive moving trucks. But also this story this scene in particular comes from a story that my father told me about my mom, who I was born in Miami, and when we moved from Miami when I was 3, around the time that they were figuring out my hearing impairment. And when we moved there, my mom had all these subtropical plants, and we moved from Miami to Cleveland in January. And when we got there, I guess our house wasn't ready, and so my mom wanted to put all of this truck with all these subtropical plants in heated storage, which is the most ridiculous story ever. And my dad told me that, and I was really moved by it. And so there's kind of this like constant collaboration that's going on, where these stories and these experiences of sound and I don't know, just lots of different things kind of make their way into the work. So this is that scene, and so I imagine that inside of the boxes are other things that are being moved, but I don't know exactly.
Well, when I looked at them without knowing the whole story, I saw them as well, beauty is an ugly word in the art world, so, but I see a lot of pain in the beauty, and somehow these kind of like almost don't belong there. And, you want to be disturbed by looking at the art, but I was trying to, you said the story, you told the story. At the beginning I thought that was a greenhouse.
Yeah. I mean, I knew also that there were all these moving trucks with translucent tops, and I was really just like, that's such a beautiful object in and of itself.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's an interesting thing that you bring up, because when we were shooting, I worked with a really amazing cinematographer, and she would set up the camera, and I would be like, just leave it there, and then she would move it around and make it the perfect composition. And I was like, no, just go back to that like weird shot that it was on, first of all, because I realized shooting plants are just such beautiful objects, and you kind of can't go wrong with them. So it was tricky, you know, every scene would be so sort of compositionally perfect. And I was thankful to the boxes for being maybe an antidote or you know, widening the sort of conversation, like that it isn't just about these plants being these perfect objects, but it's about their journey and their story and them having muscle memory and them speaking and yeah.
Terrific. Anyone else have any questions for?
Thanks. I'm interested in the interaction between the story and the music. Like, what comes first? I noticed at the beginning of this, for example, there's the opening of the door, which goes with a kind of clunk sound. So how much have you written in what you want to see, and how much are you responding? Does the story respond to the soundtrack?
It's a pretty cyclical process, because I did give the composers a list of things to think about, and then when I got the music back, I felt like I could hear some of the things that I asked them to think about. So for example, one of the composers, I told him to look at the patterns that a Zamboni makes on the ice rink as it cleans the snow, and I am a figure skater, like I come from that. So that's a language that, you know, makes a lot of sense to me. And then when I heard his music, there were all these, this is the music of Steve Roden, who's one of the composers, which you're not hearing right now. But so I could hear in his music all of these sort of cyclical patterns, and his music was really wintry and very chilly to me, but in a beautiful, warm way. And so as I was listening to it, then I kept thinking about this pattern of the Zamboni, and then I started writing a story about this Zamboni driver. And so it's like this very fluid process. So like with Christine, for example, I didn't tell her anything about plants. She was the composer who got these news stories about the tuba thefts. And so I gave her that as well as these other things. And then while she was thinking about this high school band started performing in front of her apartment in New York. And so there were all these tuba players. And so she went and made all these recordings. And so I got it back, and I was like, oh no, there are tubas in my score. Like, what am I going to do? But what she did is, I mean, it sounds like a brass band underwater, you know? So it's a very interesting, unexpected sound of a tuba. And how I respond to that, it's just like a very fluid sort of collaborative process the whole way through. So like the story, I don't know, the things that I tell her to think about make their way back into the story in a way that I didn't expect, but it's all based on listening. That's the thing I really have this allegiance to.
Based on?
Listening.
Oh, yes.
Like every decision is going to be based on what I hear.
Right.
So.
And this is wonderful. I find it mesmerizing. And
thanks.
When I saw it at the opening, you know, it stayed with me. I mean, I keep on getting flashes of the scenes. It's wonderful.
Great. Thank you.
Allison, thank you for that wonderful introduction to your work.
Thank you.
Thanks to everyone for all their great questions and for coming out tonight. And I welcome you to take some time to look around the galleries and even go upstairs. None of the artists we talked to tonight are featured upstairs. So, you know, if you have time, get up there and check out the rest of the show. And the artists will be here for a few minutes, I'm sure, to answer any other questions you might have. So thanks so much.